Hi, this is Brent-Anthony Johnson and welcome to Basic Bass. In a recent lesson we talked about permutations and we got into this thing called dead noting. And I really just wanted to break that out just a little bit more as a part two, just because it's really cool and it's a lot of fun. It's added a richness to my playing that I really, really appreciate as we kind of play through this like linear information of bass lines and things of that nature. It's nice to stop and put little punctuations in the context of our lines that kind of break it up and stop them from, that sort of thing. So if you take a very basic, what I call basically a Mixolydian type of bass line, which is the old, they refer to it as an old 1-4-5 bass line. So if you were to take the same Mixolydian type scale that we're very used to and just sort of play. Which is another scale that we'll talk about. So in this case, I'm using G, and I'm going to stop that right now, and maybe I will use G. Is it okay if I use G today as a bass note? Third fret of the E string. I think I'll do that today. I use a lot of C, I use some A, but today we're going to do G just because it sits really well for this particular exercise and it's a lot of fun. This idea is I'm going to play the notes G, third fret of the E string, B, second fret of the A string, D, fifth fret of the A string, E, second fret of the D string, and then G, fifth fret of the D string. So the line you've heard this line a bunch. If you actually play a minor 7, because that looks like 1, 3, 5, 6 octave as far as the intervals are concerned. As far as the intervals are concerned, if this is just simply from a root note. And so remember here, as I play this line, I am not playing in G major. I'm using a lot of the facets and features of G major, but for instance, I'm not using a major third, and I'm not using a major 7th. As a matter of fact, if you played the minor 7th in this context, which would be F in this particular bass line, which has nothing to do with any major key or not, because if it was G major, you would have this note F sharp, G flat. So having that note F sharp or G flat would make it G major. We're not talking about that. We're talking about natural F, the note F there. So you get this. And that F would be played on the third fret of the D string. And so we can use that, or we can use the octave G. So when you take this bass line, now you've heard this a lot, early rock and roll. Or right? And so once again, I'm just employing eighth notes here with my right hand, index middle, 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 index middle. There you go. That's better, right? So you've heard this a lot. If we incorporate the F as a minor 7th, you've certainly heard that a lot. Early rock and roll tends to have that. This is the first part of what's called a 1-4-5 bass line, which doesn't really exist because you're actually not playing from G major to C major in this context to D major, which would be the 5th, and back. You're simply using intervallic information. This is this, and if you were actually playing G would be 1, and if you're actually playing a scale, which you're not, the 4th would be C, and therefore the 5th would be D. Nothing wrong with that. It's just a way of identifying a particular type of bass line that, once again, is not in key. It's just simply the information that we're playing. You'll find that rock and roll, funk, folk, a lot of different types of music, for instance, really don't come from a they come from a key center, they come from a bass note, or there's a bass line that has to do with information like that, but it's not really in a key per se. Nothing wrong with that. Doesn't make it illegitimate, doesn't make it, poor music or poor person's music or less highbrow music. But of course, the difference is, let's just say the Beatles playing Twist and Shout, and I Saw Her Standing There, to when George Martin began to produce them and bring in full, symphony, full orchestra with their music, to the extent that on some of those songs, they didn't even play their instruments on those songs. Eleanor Rigby being a perfect example of that, where the Beatles sang on Eleanor Rigby and George Martin wrote that arrangement and that sort of thing and conducted that through. Beautiful song, by the way. I consider that a perfect song. You're introduced to two characters. One of them dies. I mean, sincerely, that is really wonderful musical information. And the line of Eleanor Rigby is actually a Dorian line. Look into that. That's one of those cool things to find out. You'll find out some of your highbrow music is actually a modal melody versus a pentatonic melody, which we'll get into later. Actually kind of starting now. So if we take this line, again, or this line, there's ways to approach that. You had, the early rock and rollers, Chuck Berry, Little Richard. Little Richard kind of doubled up on that. Or even on occasion. Whereas, Chuck Berry, one or the other, alternating. And then, enter Elvis, where he began to play more information. His basic rhythm for a lot of his rock and roll songs, well, they were all rock and roll, but you'll recognize this. Which is taking the exact same line and sort of rhythmically altering it a little bit to kind of show a different emphasis for the purpose of dance. That sort of thing is really cool. So as bass players, back in the day there, they were just kind of, a lot of them with just one finger. When I came along, and some other players certainly before me that influenced me, they would add the dead note to bring, I don't know, a different rhythmic bent to the music itself. Underneath it, on top of it, you have vocalists and other lead instruments and things of that nature. And underneath, there was this wonderful sort of percolating sort of sound that really attracted me. A lot of people have this. Jocko talks about learning it from a Cuban player that had it in his playing, and then kind of getting with him and actually kind of inheriting that and just sort of bringing it into adopting that into his style of playing, which is where I got it. Players like him. Players like James Jamerson didn't really use a lot of dead noting. Then Jocko came along and that sort of thing, and he was using it a lot, and it really did attract me. So as I started practicing it, other than trying to practice Jocko's songs and things of that nature, and bringing in my own information, I was incorporating things into as I was growing as a player. One of the things I practiced was adding dead notes to this line. And again, in this context, just to get started, I'm sort of using my index finger to play the dead notes and my middle finger to play the actual note. That's a good way to start. You can mix that up rhythmically. You can change it around. Once again, this is foundational information. So the line starts like this, but adding dead noting, it begins to sound like this. And you can do a lot of cool things with that. Adding that rhythm was sort of an impetus for myself to kind of consider different ways to play that. Now, because it's a very, very symmetrical line, you've got your middle finger here playing this G, but then it's pretty much index finger, pinky, and And so one of the other things I would do is change things around with my fretting hand. So that's simply alternating pinky, index, pinky, index, pinky, index, pinky, index. But I'm actually going back a string. So see what I mean? So adding dead notes to that can go in a lot of different directions and add a lot of really cool rhythm to your playing. So that'd be another way to play that. That's not so much dead noting as it is just changing these notes and just using the pattern to play pattern. And so earlier I was talking about playing in boxes. This is sort of a box as well. And it can move around. This is probably one of the most usable boxes I can think of, as opposed to playing, at least you got a deeper or a richer sort of intervallic bent that you can use. And it's part of a bass line that's very well known that you're going to use throughout a lot of information. A lot of music uses exactly that bass line. So you can play and you'll hear and again, in my left hand, I'm just simply releasing the string. Notice I don't take my fingers off the string. It's sort of a muting scenario. And you can use it very good usage throughout to make your line stand up a lot, you know. And if you incorporate the minor 7, and then you can actually use chromatic information, which is basically all intervals. And I'm going to start with the note B and walk it up to D on my A string. So I'm just going to use all my fingers in order. B with my index finger, C with my middle finger, C sharp D flat with my ring finger, and D with my pinky on the A string. So now if I'm going to dead note and use an open string, it's as simple as that. And using chromatic information does bring depth to your line. It adds a lot of really cool colors to your line. And these are things that you can just simply practice. These are just ways to have fun. And of course we can expand that to play the full 1-4-5 scenario if you want to. But once again, these are just the foundation. These pieces of information are simply the foundation to get you active. See you next time.